Hey guys, now we're going to study Smart's fourth anticipated objection to his identity thesis in the strict sense. So, what's really important to remember is that we are not meant to study the third anticipated objection. The reason for that is because we need to have prior knowledge of Wittgenstein. Do you like my German accent? Wittgenstein? I don't think I did a good job, but hey, it's still fun to say Wittgenstein. Anyway, we don't need to know anything about Wittgenstein. So, because of that, we're just going to skip the third objection and move on to the fourth, which only really requires prior knowledge or an understanding of Smart's arguments. So, what do we need to do? Well, of course, we need to explore Smart's reply to his third anticipated objection to his identity thesis in the strict sense. And that means we need to do what we usually do, which is we name, define, and interrelate different terms. Then we go ahead and we explore a summary. Now, what I want to say, when I put together this summary, I couldn't help but think that it wasn't as clear as the reading, but then I did think that the summary gives a little bit of prior knowledge, and the summary makes even more sense once we actually do the reading because the reading has more of a logical coherence to it as we read through it. So bear with me if some of these things are a little bit iffy, a bit wishy-washy. Once we actually get through the actual reading after the summary, things will make a lot of sense, okay? So we read the summary with the non-linguistic representations, and then we go ahead and we trace how he develops his reply when we actually read his text. So can you score yourself on these three success criteria? Give yourself a score out of 4 for each of them, please. And then can you draw an image that represents ignorance? Or more importantly, when someone is being ignorant, what do they look like? What kind of behaviors do they engage in? Can you do that for me, please? All right, so the first thing to say is that if we were to write out the objection that he anticipates in standard form, it's really, really easy to get. I still think there are lots of logical fallacies in here, but what we're going to find out is that the most important logical fallacy, according to Smart, is that, well, there's just one of them, all right? And we'll find out what that is in a minute. But basically, I think this argument's pretty flawed, but some people can say, in a sense, it's valid, but I don't know, it makes a lot of assumptions. Have we got an issue of a not properly distributed middle term here? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what you guys think. But anyway, this is the objection that he thinks would be raised, all right? If after images are not in a physical space, and brain processes are in a physical space, therefore, an after image is not a brain process, okay? And we can do this in a visual summary just to make things much clearer. Premise 1, after image. Just stare at this image again for like 30 seconds and look at something really white and tell me if you see different colors. Can you do that for me? Right, so if an after image does not exist in a three-dimensional space with time, then it must exist somewhere else. Agreed? Take a note. Then we could say brain processes are material things, right? Which means that they occur in time and space. So our logical conclusion is that an after image is not a brain process. Take a note. Now that's a pretty easy argument to get, right? And I think what we really need to keep in mind for the whole of this objection, just to clear things up, is when he's talking about the after image, he's literally talking about the after image. He's not talking about the brain processes that underpin it. He's talking about, quite literally that object you see when you stare at something bright, okay? Or even when you close your eyes. So keep that in mind. We're not talking about anything else but the immediately apparent, and I mean apparent in a kind of epistemological sense. In other words, it's something we see directly. So the apparent after image that we see directly straight away, immediately, is not necessarily anything else but that apparent direct immediate after image. That's really important to know because it'll make a lot of the rest of the summary make more sense, okay? So take a note. Okay, so this is where things get a little bit confusing, all right? It's because basically he says, look, this argument is guilty of something we call ignoratio elenchi. What on earth does that mean? Well, it's a logical fallacy which basically says that a person who's developing what could be considered a valid and consistent argument doesn't really know what they're refuting. And because they don't really know what they're arguing against, they come up with an invalid conclusion that doesn't really match the true situation. Okay? So basically, I think you should take that note down right now. Okay? Something along the lines of ignorance of refutation is what ignoratio elenchi is. All right. So here's an example, right? Penguins are black and white. Some old TVs are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. Oh my God. Could you think of a more absurd argument? But that's one of the first images that came out. Now, maybe, even though we can see that there are so many other logical fallacies tied to this particular standard form argument, it could be that the person didn't really know what they were trying to argue. So they have like an absurd mismatched argument, all right? And that's the whole point of me putting it up there. All right, so let's have a look. All right, ignorance of refutation means that a person isn't really aware of what they should be arguing or what they should be arguing against. Or what might be even a better way to put it is that if you're committing the fallacy of ignoratio elenchi, which literally means ignorance of refutation, right, what you're really saying is you don't understand. You could argue that the person doesn't fully understand what it really is that they should be arguing against, all right? So they want to refute something that just is not the correct argument, right? And in a sense, they end up presenting an argument that doesn't match the situation. That's what ignorantio elenchi actually is all about. I'll go through it again. So the person is really ignorant about the thing they should be arguing about, so they present an argument that doesn't match the situation, all right? So it might be in its own particular context logical and valid, though I'd have to say, to tell you the truth, I don't really see this as logical and valid. I think there's a lot of other assumptions of logical fallacies we can get out of it. But, you know, it has the structure of a standard form. But, you know, because it's not really arguing about, you know, that ontological realness or what's really going on, or it's not arguing about the real thing, it's kind of irrelevant. And that's the whole point. That's what Smart says. So Smart comes along and he says, look, here's how I believe the argument is just a bit absurd, all right? The after image, that immediately apparent thing that appears to me, right, is not a brain process, okay? That's really important. And the way that we can think about that is that when a surgeon, right, performs brain surgery, they don't see the orange or yellowish after image effect that he talks about in his text when he's talking about his after image. Take a note. So the after image isn't the brain process. More likely the after image could be an effect of the brain process, but it's not the brain process, okay? All right. So what's really clear then is that it's the experience of the after image that is a brain process, okay? Now let's just go through that. Obviously the brain has to coordinate a lot of neuronal activity. There's a lot of neuro psychology going on there, or neurophysiology going on at that point in time. And that's manufacturing our sensation and understanding of it. But that it's that actual experience that the brain manufactures that is the brain process, okay? So the experience is the brain process, but the after image is not. Take a note. Let me just say that again. It's the experience that is the brain process, the after image is not. Let me say that again. It's the experience that is the after image. It's the experience that is the brain process. The after image is not. Right, and one way for me to make it even clearer is that the experience is the brain process because the experience is produced by some kind of neuro-linguistic computation that occurs within the brain. Well, that's what I think anyway. So, so Smart quite clearly says the experience is not the after image, or it's not, the experience is not the yellow and the orange tinge that I see. The experience does not have the qualities of being yellow and orange. Take a note. But one way we talk about experience, and we do it quite often, is that we talk about it in a materialist sense. So we can't say the yellow-orange patch is the brain process, not at all. But we can say the experience of the yellow-orange patch is the brain process. So we can call it the yellow-orange patch on the wall experience, okay? Which means then that we only really have, from his point of view, a material language about experience. And therefore, it kind of further confirms that basically experiences are brain processes. Take a note. Again, the language we use to describe experience and how experience is produced is it uses a kind of material language to achieve that. Let's kind of read and see how we go, all right? Objection 4. The after image is not a physical space. The brain process is, so the after image is not a brain process. This is ignoratio elenchi. He's saying, yes, the after image is not a brain process, but you are not arguing against the thing that we really need to argue about. Take a note. I'm not arguing that the after image is a brain process, but that the experience of having an after image is a brain process. You get it? Obviously, there's the neuro-linguistic activity that goes through and manufactures the experience, it processes the experience, that makes the experience happen. Therefore, it is a brain process, but the after image isn't. It's the brain process of seeing it and experiencing it is. Take a note. It is the experience which is reported in the introspective report. So whenever I reflect on my experience, that's what I mean by introspective report. Similarly, it is objected that the after image is yellow-orange, but the surgeon looking into your brain would see nothing yellow-orange. My reply is that it is the experience of seeing yellow-orange that is being described, and this experience is not a yellow-orange something. So, to say that a brain process cannot be yellow-orange is not to say that brain processes cannot, in fact, be the experience of having a yellow-orange after image. Take a note. So to say that the brain is not yellow-orange doesn't mean that the brain processes can't produce the experience of the yellow-orange after image, or more importantly, that we don't have the experience of the yellow-orange after image and the experience has a material process. Okay? Take a note. There is, in a sense, no such thing as an after image or sense datum, though, that's really interesting, there is, in a sense, no such thing as an after image or a sense datum, though there is such a thing as the experience of having an image, and this experience is described indirectly in the material object language in phenomenal language, for there is no such thing. Alright, so this is what I really like. This is where we've got clearer than the summary. In a sense, there is no real ontological after image, okay? But it's the experience of the after image that is real. And when we say that we see the after image, we're implying through phenomenal language that that material process of experience and the brain process that produced it occurred. You need to take a note. So let's just recap here. There is no such thing as an after image or sense datum, though there is such a thing as the experience of having an image, and this experience is described indirectly, so it's not directly said in material object language, not in phenomenal language, for there is no such thing. Right. So he's saying this kind of phenomenal language, nah, it's an illusion. It's not real. So to say I see the yellow-orange tinge is phenomenal language, it's not real. It just doesn't exist. But ontologically, if we use what we call material object language, we would always say, instead of I see the yellow-orange patch, what you would say is I have the experience of seeing the yellow-orange patch, and that means that I'm referring to objective processes that occur in the brain that generate that experience. Take a note. We describe the experience by saying, in effect, that it is like the experience we have when, for example, we see a yellow-orange patch on the wall. Trees on wallpaper can be green, but not the experience of seeing or imagining a tree or wallpaper. Or if they are described as green or yellow, this can only be derived in a sense. All right, so look, let's go back here. I really do want to make the point that what wasn't made in the summary was that he rejects the kind of realness of the sense datum, of which the after image is an example, right? If anything, the sense datum is just some kind of psychological effect of the real thing that's occurring, which is the brain process, okay? So that's really important. So therefore, to use phenomenal language, which is a type of language that just tries to refer directly to experience, it creates a bit of an illusion. And so if I say I see the yellow orange tinge, I'm effectively saying what should be described as I have the experience of seeing it. And as soon as I point to the experience, I'm referring directly to the ontological real thing, which is the brain processes that produce that experience, okay? Take a note, that's a pretty heavy stuff to get. If you've got any questions to ask, you need to come and talk to me. Cheers.